They all stared at me with disgust as the fabricated bank statements were passed around our family living room. My own mother couldn't even look me in the eyes. That moment, watching my sister Victoria's perfectly crafted performance of betrayal while knowing I was completely innocent, was when I realized technology had evolved enough to destroy someone's entire life. But what my sister didn't count on, I'm the one who taught her how to use a computer in the first place. You won't believe what I discovered when I started investigating those perfect bank statements she presented as evidence. But let me start from the beginning. Dad's funeral was exactly how he would have wanted it. Simple, dignified, with his favorite Eagles songs playing softly in the background. I stood next to Mom, both of us trying to hold it together, while Victoria sobbed dramatically into her husband Greg's shoulder. We'd all known this day was coming. Pancreatic cancer doesn't leave much room for hope, but that didn't make it any easier. He loved you so much, Mom whispered to me, squeezing my hand. You were always his rock. That small comment was probably what started everything. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing slightly. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grief makes people react in strange ways, right? If only I'd recognized that look for what it was. The reading of the will a week later was straightforward. Dad had split most of his assets evenly between Victoria and me, with Mom well taken care of through her own accounts and the house. There was one exception, though. Dad's tech company stock portfolio, worth about $450,000, was left entirely to me. To my daughter Emma, who believed in my vision when no one else did and invested her own savings in my startup, the lawyer read in a monotone voice. The fruits of our shared risk should be yours alone. I felt a lump form in my throat. Back when Dad was struggling to launch his cybersecurity firm, I'd put my entire savings of $30,000 into the company while Victoria had refused, saying it was too risky. It was money I'd saved working double shifts at the hospital where I worked as an ER nurse. I'd lived on ramen noodles for 2 years while Victoria and Greg bought their dream house. When I glanced at my sister, her face was completely blank, but her knuckles had turned white as she gripped Greg's hand. I should have known then that something was brewing. It's only fair, Mom said later as we gathered at her house. You took the risk, Emma. Victoria didn't. Victoria stayed silent through dinner, barely touching her food. When her husband mentioned something about booking a vacation with their half, she abruptly stood up and left the room. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I figured she just needed time to process everything. What I didn't realize was that Victoria was processing something very different from grief. Life moved on as it always does after tragedy. I threw myself back into my work at the hospital, pulling extra shifts to keep my mind occupied. Mom started grief counseling. Victoria and I texted occasionally, mostly short check-ins about Mom. Everything seemed to be settling into a new normal. Then came that Sunday dinner that changed everything. Mom had insisted on reviving our family tradition of Sunday meals together, saying Dad would have wanted us to stay close. I arrived first, bringing a homemade apple pie, Dad's favorite, as a small tribute. When Victoria and Greg arrived 30 minutes late, something felt off immediately. Victoria wouldn't meet my eyes, and Greg looked uncomfortable, like he was being forced to attend. We made it through most of dinner with stilted conversation before Mom finally sighed and asked, "What's going on with you two? The tension is making my food taste bad." Victoria set down her fork carefully. "I didn't want to do this here, Mom. But since you asked..." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folder. "I've found something disturbing." My stomach dropped even before I knew what was happening. There was something in her tone, a rehearsed quality, that sent warning signals through my body. Emma has been stealing from Dad's accounts for months before he died. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Mom gasped. I sat frozen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. That's absolutely insane, I finally managed. Victoria, what are you talking about? She slid the folder across the table. See for yourself. Bank statements showing transfers from Dad's personal account to yours. Almost $200,000 over the last 6 months of his life. Mom opened the folder with shaking hands, and I leaned over to look. There they were, what appeared to be official bank statements from Dad's bank, showing multiple transfers to an account with my name on it. Dates, transaction numbers, everything looked legitimate, except I had never received that money. This is fake, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising in my chest. I never received any money from Dad, except what was in the will. Victoria's expression was one of practiced sadness. I didn't want to believe it either, but Greg's brother works at the bank. He found the discrepancies during a routine audit and felt obligated to tell us. This is completely fabricated, I insisted, feeling the situation spiraling out of control. Check my accounts. You won't find these deposits. We already thought of that, Greg interjected. You could have transferred the money elsewhere or withdrawn it in cash. I looked at Mom, expecting to see doubt about these ridiculous accusations. Instead, I saw uncertainty in her eyes, and it felt like a knife to my heart. Mom, you can't possibly believe this. I would never steal from Dad. Never. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. Why would your sister make something like this up, Emma? That's when I realized how perfectly Victoria had played this. Of course, Mom would ask why Victoria would lie, not why I would steal. The statements looked real. Greg's supposed connection to the bank added credibility, and Victoria had planted just enough seeds about me being Dad's favorite to make jealousy seem like a plausible motive. I think, Victoria said softly, we should talk about adjusting the will distribution to account for what Emma already took. And there it was, her real objective. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. This is unbelievable. Those documents are fake. I'm not sitting here being accused of stealing from our dying father. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, stopping only when Mom called my name. The hurt and confusion in her voice nearly broke me. Emma, please, if there's an explanation, the explanation is that your daughter is lying to you, I said, not turning around because I couldn't bear to see the doubt in her eyes. And I'm going to prove it. I drove home in a state of shock, my mind racing with questions. How had Victoria created those convincing bank statements? Who would believe me without evidence? What was I supposed to do now? When I got home to my apartment, I poured myself a stiff drink and tried to think logically. Victoria had always been the emotional one, the dramatic one, while I was the practical problem solver. I needed to approach this methodically. First step, understand exactly what I was dealing with. I texted Mom, "Can you please take photos of those bank statements and send them to me?" Her response came an hour later. Photos of each page, sent without comment. I studied them carefully. They looked perfect. The logo, the formatting, the account numbers. If I didn't know better, I would believe they were real myself. But one small detail caught my eye. The font used for the transaction descriptions was slightly different from the one used for the amounts. It was a tiny discrepancy that most people wouldn't notice, but I had an eye for details. It's what made me a good nurse. That's when I remembered something Dad had told me about his work in cybersecurity. In the digital age, Emma, perfect forgeries don't exist. There's always a fingerprint if you know where to look. I needed expert help, and I knew exactly who to call. Mike Chen had worked with my dad for years as the head of digital forensics at his company. He'd been at the funeral, had given me a card, and told me to reach out if I ever needed anything. I never imagined I'd be calling this soon, or for something like this. This is unusual, Mike said, when I explained the situation over coffee the next morning. He examined the photos of the statements on my phone, zooming in on certain areas. These look professionally done, But there are inconsistencies. See this pixelation around the numbers? That suggests digital manipulation. Hope sparked inside me. So you can tell they're fake? I can tell they're suspicious, he corrected. But proving they're fake, and proving who created them, that's going to take more work. Do you have any idea how your sister might have done this? I thought about Victoria. She wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but her husband Greg worked in marketing and was always talking about the latest digital tools. I'm not sure, I admitted, but whatever method she used, I need to understand it if I'm going to clear my name. Mike nodded thoughtfully. The technology to create convincing forgeries is more accessible than ever. AI tools can generate realistic-looking documents. Deepfake technology isn't just for videos anymore. It can be used for document forgery too. So what do? We investigate, he said simply. Digital evidence leaves digital trails. If your sister used AI tools or software to create these forgeries, she left fingerprints somewhere. We just need to find them. What happened over the next 3 weeks was like something out of a tech thriller movie, except it was my actual life at stake. Mike taught me about digital forensics as we worked, explaining how metadata and digital artifacts could reveal the truth. Our first breakthrough came when I remembered that Victoria had used my laptop during a visit 3 months ago. She'd claimed her phone was dead and asked to check her email. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. She could have installed spyware, Mike explained. It would give her access to your banking passwords, personal information, maybe even copies of your signature. Sure enough, a deep scan of my laptop revealed a keylogger program installed around that time. It had been recording everything I typed, including my banking passwords. This is how she knew the exact format of your bank statements, Mike said. She had access to the real thing as a template, but the bigger question remained. How had she created such convincing forgeries? The answer came from an unexpected source. Mom called to tell me that Victoria and Greg had been pushing her to meet with the family lawyer to discuss redistributing Dad's assets in light of my alleged theft. I don't know what to think anymore, Emma, Mom said, her voice tired and sad. Victoria's so certain in those bank statements. Mom, please, I begged. Just give me a little more time before you do anything. I'm close to proving these are forgeries. There was a long pause. 2 weeks, she finally said. I'll hold them off for 2 weeks. The clock was ticking now. I needed concrete proof, not just theories. Mike suggested we needed to get access to Victoria's devices, where the evidence of forgery would likely be stored. But we need to do this legally, he warned. Breaking into her accounts would make us the criminals. That's when I had an idea. Victoria had always been careless with her passwords, often using the same one across multiple accounts, and I remembered helping her set up her cloud backup last Christmas. I might know her cloud password, I told Mike. It would be legal to access it if I have the password, right? He looked uncomfortable. It's a gray area, but if you have reason to believe evidence of a crime against you is stored there, and you already have the password, I took a deep breath and typed in the password I remembered. Misty the Parrot, 2010. Her first pet's name, and the year she got it, followed by the year. To my amazement, it worked. What we found was the smoking gun we needed. A folder labeled Project Justice contained everything. PDF tutorials on using AI tools to create fake documents, a history of ChatGPT prompts asking how to forge bank statements, templates downloaded from a dark web forum, and, most damning of all, the original files of the forged bank statements with multiple revision histories. She wasn't even particularly careful, Mike said, sounding almost disappointed. The metadata on these files tells us exactly when they were created and modified. The timestamps showed the files had been created just 3 days after the reading of the will. But what hit me hardest was finding a text document titled Narrative. Doc, that contained what could only be described as Victoria's script for her accusation, including predicted reactions from Mom and me, and prepared responses to potential questions. She had planned every detail of her performance. We compiled everything into a comprehensive report, complete with technical explanations that would be understandable to non-experts. I asked Mike to attend the family meeting I was planning as an expert witness. Then I called Mom. "I need everyone together on Sunday," I said. "I have proof about the bank statements. Victoria and Greg already have plans." "Cancel them," I interrupted, using a firmness that surprised even me. "This is about Dad's legacy and our family. Either everyone is there, or I take this to the police instead." The threat of police involvement worked. That Sunday, we gathered once again around Mom's dining table. The atmosphere was so tense you could cut it with a knife. Victoria looked confident, even smug. Greg seemed nervous. Mom just looked tired of it all. I placed my laptop on the table and connected it to the TV screen on the wall. "Before I begin," I said calmly, "I want to thank everyone for coming. What I'm about to show you was difficult and painful to discover, but it's necessary for the truth to come out." Victoria rolled her eyes. "More denials? Mom, how long are we going to entertain this?" I ignored her and nodded to Mike, who began the presentation. "My name is Mike Chen. I worked with Richard, your husband and father, for over a decade in cybersecurity. I'm here as a digital forensics expert to explain what we found." The presentation was methodical and devastating. Mike explained how the bank statements had been forged using AI tools, showing side-by-side comparisons of the fake documents with genuine bank statements. He demonstrated the inconsistencies in fonts, spacing, and digital artifacts that proved manipulation. Then came the most damning evidence. Screenshots from Victoria's own cloud storage showing the forgery tutorials, the ChatGPT prompts, and the multiple drafts of the fake statements. Victoria's face had gone from smugly confident to ashen. When Mike showed the narrative.doc file with her script for the accusation, she lunged for the laptop. "This is invasion of privacy," she shouted. "You hacked my accounts." "Actually," I said quietly, "you never changed your cloud password from the one I helped you set up. No hacking required. The real question is, why did you do this, Victoria?" The room fell silent. Mom was staring at Victoria with an expression of dawning horror. "Victoria," she whispered, "tell me this isn't true." For a moment, I thought Victoria would continue to deny everything. But facing the overwhelming evidence, something in her seemed to break. She collapsed back into her chair, put her face in her hands, and began to sob. "We needed the money," she finally said between sobs. "Greg lost his job 6 months ago. We've been living on credit cards. The house is in foreclosure." Greg looked away, his face red with shame. "So you decided to steal my inheritance by accusing me of stealing from our dying father?" I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. Victoria looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "You always got everything. Dad's approval, the better grades, the stable career. Even now, he left you the most valuable asset. It wasn't fair. Life isn't fair," Mom said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "But family doesn't do this to family." The aftermath was as painful as you might expect. Mom asked Victoria and Greg to leave. She couldn't even look at them. As they walked out, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness for what our family had become. Later, when it was just Mom and me sitting in the quiet house, she took my hand. "I should have believed you from the start," she said. "I'm so sorry, Emma. You were presented with what looked like irrefutable evidence," I said. "In the age of AI and deepfakes, how do any of us know what's real anymore?" She squeezed my hand. "By knowing the character of the people we love." I failed at that, and I'll regret it forever. We sat in silence for a while before she asked, "What will you do now? About Victoria, I mean." It was the question I'd been wrestling with since discovering the truth. Part of me wanted justice. legal consequences for what she'd tried to do. Another part remembered the little girl who'd held my hand on the first day of school, telling me everything would be okay. I don't know yet, I admitted. But whatever happens, it needs to start with her getting help. This level of deception and jealousy isn't normal. 2 days later, I received a text from Victoria. I'm starting therapy. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. As for the inheritance, I decided to honor Dad's wishes, but in my own way. I kept the tech stock portfolio, but established a trust for Victoria's kids' education. Dad had always valued education above all else, and I knew he wouldn't want his grandchildren to suffer for their mother's mistakes. Mike offered me a job at Dad's company, saying they needed people who could think critically in an age of increasingly perfect digital deception. I took a leave of absence from nursing to try it out. The most important lesson I learned from this whole ordeal: in a world where seeing is no longer believing, knowing the truth requires more than evidence. It requires wisdom, skepticism, and a deep understanding of human nature. Dad had been trying to teach me that all along through his work in cybersecurity. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed that tiny font discrepancy, or if I hadn't known Victoria's password, or if Mike hadn't been willing to help. How many people are out there, falsely accused by fake evidence so convincing that the truth never comes to light? It's a scary thought, but it also reminds me why Dad's work, and now my work, matters so much. In the battle between truth and technology, someone needs to stand on the side of truth. As for Victoria and me, well, that's a longer road to recovery. We're starting with monthly coffee meetings. No talk of money, inheritance, or the past. Just two sisters trying to remember who we were before technology made it so easy to lie. Truth is, I still love my sister. I hate what she did, but family is complicated like that. Maybe someday we'll rebuild what we lost. Maybe we'll create something new instead. Either way, I'm going into it with my eyes wide open, because in the digital age, that's the only way to see clearly.